Hi, Ravi. Thanks a lot for joining the ContraMinds podcast. I've been an avid follower of your newsletter, the work that you do, and it's quite a privilege to talk to you. Thanks for taking time and sharing your thoughts with our audience.
Thank you so much, Swami. I'm happy to be here.
Uh, Ravi, I just wanted to quickly dive into the subject itself, because it's an interesting subject, especially when you really look at storytelling. That's becoming more and more important in the context of what we do at work, the way we learn, the way we communicate with people. I think it's fairly becoming foundational in the way we actually have to present ourselves to people, right? So, therefore, I feel that storytelling is a very critical aspect and a skill that most of us need to have. Uh, Being somebody who's completely away from the storytelling, kind of a educational background, which is you're a chartered accountant. Of course, you then went and did your MBA. Where did this interest in storytelling really happen, and any incident that you remember which triggered you to say, hey, this is something that I want to take up as my profession?
No, thanks, Swami. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's one that I get asked a lot, especially because because of the CA degree. I keep joking that hey, we all make mistakes in life, so you should not pull me for that. No, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that time and period, and I think one way in which that supposed contradiction for me gets resolved of what is a CA stroke MBA consultant doing as a storyteller is that I Swami have a very wide definition of the word storytelling, right? And it's actually an interesting debate in the world of storytelling. If you get into that world, there are some practitioners who have a reasonably narrow definition of that word, saying that a story means that it has to have an incident and a time and a place and dialogue and all of that, right? So that's one variant or one version of what a story could mean. I've got kind of a very wide definition, right? And in my mind, it is any technique that you use to communicate your ideas, your data, your facts, your opinions, in order to sometimes just inform other people, engage them, convince them. And the only kind of place where I draw my line is you're doing it with data and facts, right? So there is also a whole world of storytelling with fiction. While I do sometimes go into that world and learn from it and apply lessons from it, but that's where I limit it. So to me, if somebody is making a compelling presentation with numbers and data, which a lot of CAs do, a lot of MBAs do, they are telling a good story, right? A newscaster who starts his or her bulletin, they don't say here are the top facts of the night, here are the top stories of the night. A guy like Malcolm Gladwell, who reports on the leading social science research of the day, is called a great storyteller. Someone like Bill Bryson, who writes about science in such a beautiful, striking way, is called a great storyteller. John Stewart is called a great storyteller. Harsha Bogle is called a great storyteller. Shekhar Gupta is called a great storyteller. To me, all of these are ways and means of basically using the data, facts, numbers, opinions, etc., from your field and putting it in front of an audience in an interesting way, right? And in a way that makes it clear to them, makes it clear what is happening, engages them better, and also hopefully convinces them about your point of view. So what that is one, I think, way by which I come at this skill, which is take a very wide definition of it, and in all of these techniques kind of encompass there. Now coming to incidents, I would say, um, like, yeah, there have been, it is like in many of these things, it's probably not just one thing that completely turns you, although there is one incident that does come to mind and I will share that. But I think the seeds were sown when I was 7 years old in Bombay. We used to live in a suburb called Sion, and I must have been, this was been the year 1986. And uh, that was not the time when libraries and reading was the norm, right? So it was quite rare. And my dad, I remember, took me across the road in this main road in Sion, and then there was like a little, like a garage shop, and it was a library. right? And that was the first library I ever saw. And the first book I picked up was a Chacha Chaudhary book, right? And you just need to do that at some level, right? I feel that journey, once it starts, that reading journey, then you're at some level you're immersing yourself in the world of stories without even knowing it. And then, as we all do, we move from Chacha Chaudhary to Tinkle and Amar Chitra Katha and Chanda Mama, and then you slowly pick up your first Enid Blyton, and then you run through all that famous fire and all of that. Then you go to Agatha Christie, then you graduate to a Sydney Sheldon and and Arthur Haley and all of that. So I did all of that till 10th. I was, just immersed in the world of this fiction storytelling, and you are absorbing, right? You're learning and all of that whilst school and studies is happening. Um, Post that, somehow some switch got turned after 10th for me, where I realized that, I'm done with fiction. It's a very weird thing, and now I hardly read fiction. I don't read fiction at all, which is, and now I realize it's a loss. I think I should read more fiction. But so non-fiction, the world is incredible, right? I got suddenly interested in history, and I got reading about various histories, or even science storytelling, like guys like Bill Bryson, later guys like Yuval Harari, and so on. So I think, um, uh, invisibly or without necessarily going out to do it, I was immersing myself in the world of good stories. So that was always there. The incident that definitely I remember is, this was in 2009 or so. I'd been a consultant for about 4 years, and in consulting you're dealing with a lot of data, right? And there used to be this pride almost that, boss, I have done everything, I've looked at every possible angle, all data I have looked at, and here is proof, right? So almost always the presentations to clients used to not be so much about, here is your problem and here's how I'm solving it. It used to be that, hey, you paid me money, so please be ready to get blown away by the amount of work that I've done. And which is so counterproductive. And so clients would obviously, some of them would be too overwhelmed to react, but there were some who knew this game and who could see through it and would be like, "But I don't need all your data." And so one guy, I actually went and asked him, that his name was Abhishek. He was with a firm called India Equity Partners then. And I told him, Abhishek, what can we do, what can I do to improve my presentations, right? And so his answer was actually very planned, nothing out of the extraordinary. He just said, Ravi, you guys just end up throwing a lot of data on the slide. You need to really find the story that's there in the data and just tell me that story. And I think sometimes you need to hear a comment when you're prepared to hear it. Had I heard that comment when I was 5 years younger, I don't think it would have meant so much to me. But something just struck, maybe it's all the reading and everything, and it just hit me that, oh my god, yes, we are just overwhelming clients with data. And there was almost, it doesn't happen to, almost like a switch that turned to me after that time, that my presentations became less heavy, less data intense, and started looking for the story more clearly from then. And then, yeah, I think then from then on, it has been like building on top of that realization and learning more and more about the skill. And it's fascinating that the more I learn, the more I realize, oh shit, there's so much more to learn, so much more to, yeah. So that's kind of a long rambling answer to that question.
No, fantastic. So which brings me to one interesting point that you made, Ravi, which is reading at an early stage in your life, right? So you carry so much of vivid images of various things that you read, and probably it comes back at your work, when you're socializing. So many things happen. Uh, but today, when you look at kids, and when you look at education, the reading skills probably have dwindled, or there are other forms of reading. Okay. So how important do you think it's to be started at an early stage? Or if I were say a youngster going out, coming out of college, or I'm a young professional, I'm not used to reading so much, where do I begin?
Interesting, yeah. So I used to have this feeling, right, that reading is kind of a sine qua non, to use a Latin term, that you have to know, you have to be reading in order to be a good writer. And I remember interviewing this person called Shreyat Karkera, who is one of the co-founders of FinShots, right? And Finchos is one of the largest read, I think, newsletters in India currently, and they have this. And he was one of the first writers for it, and I was astounded to hear that he hardly did any reading as a child. So I mean, till that time, I had that belief. I think it's fine. You can start anytime. I don't think there's any nowhere should you say, oh my god, I've never read as a child, now I can't. No, you can. Right? Anybody can start at any time. I think curiosity is a more powerful thing to have. You should be curious at whatever age about whatever it is that makes you curious, right? So it may be about fighter planes, it may be about sports, and find information about what makes you curious in whatever way appeals to you. Reading is just one way. It could be YouTube videos if you find that you fancy. It could be podcasts. It could be conversations with people. So be curious and find out more about what it excites you, what interests you, and then you'll figure out ways, right? If maybe reading is not your thing, maybe audiobooks are, or something. So I would say that would be my probably, yeah, it's tough to call myself giving advice, but yeah, that would be my input to somebody who's young and who may not be able to read too much. Just be curious and follow your curiosity.
Okay. And what do you think are the key tenets of how you went about improving your story telling skills? Because once Abhishek told you that, hey, why don't you pick up a story and tell me the story in the data? So how did you go about then chiseling your way through to making yourself a master of that craft?
Yeah, so I would not necessarily call myself a master. I mean, yeah, so you're right. So it's definitely, I've been doing it for a long time. I would still call myself a lifelong student. And so books have been really useful. And again, yeah, we come back to that topic, but you'll see a bunch of them at the back. And many of these are books that have really helped me. And, I'm of course happy to share a list of some of the books that have really influenced me and made me kind of, made my skill where it is. So like off the top of my head, 2 3 books that are coming are Made to Stick is a book that really, it even now I go back, and when I'm doing some of the things, I'll be like, oh, I learned this in Made to Stick. Oh, I learned this in Made to Stick. It's by two guys called Chip Heath and Dan Heath. And foundational book on storytelling, 2008 or 7 or 8. A colleague called Rohan Desai gifted it to me, and I keep telling him, this is kind of a life changing book for me. The Pyramid Principle. It's a tough book, not an easy book to read, but extremely foundational in terms of clarity in communication. I don't think there's another book that talks about clarity more yeah, in a more fundamental way. I won't say it is an easy read, it's a tough one, but so that's one more that comes to mind. Then there are a bunch of others. In fact, I'm happy to kind of put in the show notes. I put down like 13 books, or was it 13, 12 to 13 books that really impacted me in this craft of storytelling, right? So that's one way that by which I learn, which is I will read a book, I'll get some idea, then I will try and implement it in my writing, of course, also now in my training. So that's one. Other sources of input for me would be podcasts, and especially over the last 6 7 years, often I'll get an idea from a podcast that I will again try and implement in writing or in the training, or a podcast will talk about a book which will then be something that works for me. So these are, I think, two main places. I call it the 3R model, right? Which is actually 3R or 5C. So 3R for me is reading, reflection, and writing. So, of course, reading is important. Let me talk a little bit about the reflection piece, right? Because I remember this incident with a cousin of mine called Suresh. And so I was one day telling him, hey, you know what, you should be on Twitter because you learn so much and you can immediately find out when somebody has said something, somebody's take on something. And, there's this, you can follow all these people and, always on top of the world, etc., etc. And then you should listen to podcasts. And then, by the way, you should have a Kindle. And I was probably showing off a little, not cool. But, he just, heard me out. And then he just asked me a simple question, right? Ravi, to, and I'll say it in Hindi and translate that, तू इतना पढ़ता है तो सोचता कब है? And if you read so much, when do you think? And that kind of hit me, and he was right. And there is this tendency that we all have as knowledge professionals to fill in every white space in our day, every minute in our day with something. And I also do it, right? I'm going down in a lift. I'll be like, okay, let me quickly and not waste this 30 seconds of precious time, but see what I can read or something. And Well, that, yeah, it's a natural tendency, but I do try to carve out reflection periods. And we all have heard of the shower moment, right, where you're in the shower and then suddenly an idea that, or suddenly a problem that you have not been able to crack, you'll get an idea. I like it so often. I get shower moments that I'll be like, should I spend more time in the shower? Should I take 2 baths a day? It's crazy. So I think, yeah, reflection is the second part of it. We should do more of it if you're not. And then writing, because um, often what seems like an idea that is very well formed in your head crumbles when it hits paper.
Mm.
So so you should write, you should create in some way. If writing is not your jam, then record yourself, or have a conversation with somebody. um, yeah, writing is easiest because there's no paraphernalia. But yeah, I would say read, reflect, write, and then repeat to keep getting better
Brilliant,
at it.
brilliant. So I just want to move to a important aspect of this conversation where I'm interested to know the impact of storytelling and learning. Right? Uh, why is it that uh, we read so much in school? Okay, and we are taught lots of formula, lots of subjects, and we don't seem to retain what we learned. So, if we have to retain what we learned, how can storytelling help? Maybe in history there's an interesting way to do storytelling. In geography there could be storytelling opportunities, but what do you do in a subject like math? Right, you can't storytell most of the time, is the myth that people have. So is there a way to actually use storytelling in enhancing learning?
Yeah, absolutely, there is, right? And this is one of my kind of topics that I really am passionate about. I've been working with some teachers from our son's school. In fact, one of my, you know, not long term, but maybe this year goals is to create some sort of videos on storytelling techniques for education, and then just put it up there. Yeah, very much, right? So, unfortunately, a lot of education is the chalk and talk variety, which is, you just go on a blackboard and, just keep talking. Um, so what are some ways in which, and yeah, you're right, math is a difficult one. It's not definitely, it's relatively easier in history, geography, also science. I think these are subjects where there are stories more naturally found. Math is more abstract, naturally. So but it still can be done, right? It still can be done. And so what are some of the ways? And let me kind of put down some broad techniques. So make people feel multiple senses. That's one way to do it. Make them do activities and stuff around it. And three, make them care as to why this is important. So I would kind of use these three to share some techniques. So make them feel, and feel is that we don't have just one sense, right, which is our eyes. We have multiple senses. So can you make people engage with something with multiple senses? And so in math itself, one example that comes to mind, which is, we don't actually, while we are engaging quote unquote with our eyes, we are actually engaging in math with our brain, because our
Mm.
eyes are seeing just symbols and numbers, right? But can we use pictures to make math easier, for example? And so this one example that I remember from a book called The Joy of X. There's this author called Steven Strogatz, and he's a, I think, NYT columnist, and he's a math prof and a geek. But he is amazing at his ability to make math more accessible. I didn't have a great relationship with math growing up, especially calculus, and I wish I had read somebody like him when I was younger. So I remember this example he used about the area of the circle, right? So how are we taught the area of the circle? We are not taught how. We just taught, this is it, pi r square, and that is the area of the circle. Please by heart this formula and then apply it now in sums. Now, can you explain why is it pi r square? So now he tries to do that in the book in a simple way by basically taking a circle. And I'll have to kind of put a link to that post or something, because it's difficult to visualize in an audio medium. And then dividing that into, let's say, four parts, right? Imagine them as four quarters. Now divide that further into more into 16, and then further into 32. Eventually what you'll be left with are many slices, like many thin, think of many thin pizza slices, right? What he then does is to try and combine those pizza slices into a form where, if you lay them, one slice uh, top down and one bottom up, and you lay them side by side, it broadly represents a rectangle. Very, very broadly. Of course, it's not exactly a rectangle because there is some curvature on all, on the top and the bottom, but it broadly emerges like a rectangle. And in that rectangle, what you will find is that one side is r because it's the radius, and the other side is pi r, which is the circumference ka half. So pi r into r, that's how it becomes pi r square. Like a area of a rectangle is very easy to to demonstrate, right? And so that was one visual way in which he brought out the proof of, yeah, of course, the real proof is done through calculus, and that gets too technical. But so he uses, in a way, visual metaphors to make that thing easier. So even math, I think it is possible. Make me feel has so many other elements, right? So make me feel about the person who came out with the formula or with the discovery, right? And there are some brilliant stories in science about the inventors, about Ramanujam's story. And you make suddenly you make me feel about Ramanujam. I want to know more about his math also. Make me feel about Newton, and a lot of these scientists were, at the end of the day, they were also having their squabbles and competitions and jealousies, and all of that is interesting. It gives you more color about that the discovery. I think that is one. Make me do, right, which is um, make me engage in civic activities. Make me part of a role play where I'm trying to come up with a common policy for what will we do during a break period in school. Once you start debating with other people, you realize that it's not easy to pass policy. Surprisingly, people are not listening to everything I have to say. Instead of telling you that this is how policy is passed in parliament, you just try as five people coming up with a common, yeah, you realize it's not easy. So make me do in small ways in my own, yeah, and then can I therefore learn that, extrapolate that, and learn that now it's I realize it's not easy. Make me care, which is also, we hardly do that, which is that where do I learn and where do I use this? Can you give me five real life examples where I'm going to be using quadratic equations? I don't know whether it has any use. Maybe it has I'm sure it has some genuine use, right? So I think, and there are various, I think, once you kind of think into this, various ways in which you can make all of these elements interesting by making people think, feel, do, and care.
Very nice. I really like the way you explained the pi r squared example. And in fact, in one of the ContraMinds podcasts itself, we have a professor from IIT Gandhinagar who teaches math through toys, Manish Jain.
Wow.
So it's an interesting episode that we have. So I think that'll be a good show notes for this, episode. And he really explains parabola through very interesting ways of doing it. So uh, that's
Fascinating.
that's a great example. So let me now come back to storytelling at work, right? Because one thing that I find is once you start to work, you become more rational. You become very, very, I would call it straight jacketed. And storytelling is a little bit loose, right? You feel that, oh, you know what? Uh, I just don't think you're coming to the point so easily, right? So therefore, you tend to meander, and therefore, at work, people then get too straight-jacketed. They want to actually have an answer to the problem. So, how do you think at work you found storytelling to be of value, and why do you think it's value?
Yeah, no, it's a huge value, right? So stories can clarify better. A good story can clarify better. It can engage better, and it's likely to be more memorable, right? So let me give you, a way of why stories are important, and then how can be. So if you were talking about school and what we learn, right? If I ask you in trigonometry, what is sine theta? I don't remember. And if I ask 10 people, 100 people, I don't think, maybe 10 people might remember, right? If I ask you in which year did the second battle of Panipat happen, very less chance that you will remember. But if I ask you, what is the moral of the hare and the tortoise, fable? Slow and steady wins the race. Like, everybody will remember that very clearly, right? So we remember stories, and that's because we've been dealing with stories as a mode of passing information since millennia. When humans were living in caves at the end of a long tiring day, when you sit around the fireplace, you're not going to be watching Netflix or showing PowerPoint slides, right? You are exchanging stories, but those stories had life-saving information embedded in them. So I will not come back and then say that, hey, here are 3 lessons from my hunt today. I don't do that, right? I will say, hey, you know what? I went there and then I was climbing, and then suddenly I heard this growl and I went up to the tree and I was hiding there. Then the bear came and went away, and thankfully I was fine and I came back. That's it. Now I am absorbing the lessons from that, right? So we have learned through stories for millennia. So that DNA is always there. Now, at the workplace, yeah, it's not about always meandering and going all around the place. There are some situations where you may want to um, tease the audience, make it a little bit of a mystery. And there are some situations where that works brilliantly. But that's not the only mode of telling a good story, right? So, to me, telling something clearly to the point in a good way is also an example of good storytelling, right? And that is not a skill that everybody necessarily has. Often people say, I'm going to only tell the facts, but then the facts are told in such a detailed, um, lack of focus way that the audience at the end of it, who's listening, is thinking, "Oh, what is your point? What are you trying to get at?" Right? So even the skill of getting to the point is for me a storytelling skill, and which is where the book that I mentioned, the pyramid principle, and I have a framework called as a 139 framework, where you should be able to communicate anything in a one sentence summary, in 3 sentences, and then in nine. So you have to prepare beforehand to do that, right? So that to me is a storytelling technique. So even communicating bluntly requires skill, and that is also something that can be done. Having said that, in some situations, everything is not about just directly getting to the point. You're having a large audience in a town hall, and maybe you want to engage them by talking about a personal anecdote about what happened, or you saw an exemplary um, case of somebody living your company's value, or some employee who did an extraordinary achievement. You want to tell that story, or you want to tell a story of your own life, which where you learned something and you want to be vulnerable. All of those are also examples of stories, and you may not necessarily directly say the point, hey guys, the point of the story is that I'm going to, no, it's you tell that story and the people will get that point. So that's also a type of storytelling. So I think depending upon the audience, the context, the data that you have, um, the easy and the tough answer is that the tough part of this is you have to innovate and adapt, and know all the tools that are available to you as a storyteller, and use the right tool for the right job context and audience.
So, as you were talking, Ravi, one thing that came across my mind is when you want to storytell, is there a fiber of honesty and authenticity that is prerequisite? Because you can deliver a message, you can deliver a communication, but to deliver a story, there's a bit of that authenticity and honesty that is needed in anything that you do. And therefore, great storytellers, in my view, from what I think you were talking about, are people who are probably very authentic in what they do, and therefore the ability to tell the story is far more effective. Is that a good assumption to make? And is that does that make sense to you at all?
Very, very much, Sobi. Completely critical, right? Because this is one of the biggest pushbacks that you will get, or the wrong assumptions that people have, that अरे वो तो कहानीबाज है, right? He just keeps telling stories, and the assumption is that stories is fiction, and there is fact, and they both are very different. So that's not true, right? Of course, as I mentioned, there is a world of fiction in storytelling, but don't look be very, I'm telling the listeners of this podcast that be self, I mean, think about your own growth, right? That just because somebody in your organization uses quote unquote storytelling in a bad way, let's say they're not being authentic, they're not doing the right thing, and they give a bad reputation to the word or term storytelling, that doesn't mean you have to say that, just because that guy does it badly, I will not use this technique at all. It doesn't make
Mm.
sense, right? Usko jo karna karna. Let that person do what he or she wants. You don't miss out on the benefits you can get by being an authentic storyteller, right? So if you're assuming, I'm assuming that the person who wants to apply this is genuine and honest, and so what does he or she need to keep in mind? So I call it the ACE model, ACE, right? In order to be a good storyteller, you need to have A, C, and E. What is A? A is authenticity. You cannot tell a story with lies, with fiction, unless you tell it upfront that, hey, this reminds me of that fable. Then it's fine because you're telling, or this reminds me of that movie story. You're telling it is fiction. But if you're telling that, hey, this is what the data is telling, then to the extent possible. Now, of course, data can be complicated and you may miss out on some elements genuinely. But if you're, you should do your best to have the entire complete truth. And authenticity to me, Swami, is alignment, right? Alignment between three things. Alignment between your thoughts and your words. That means you're able to say what you think in a clear way, not mincing words, not saying thinking one thing but saying something else, which we know a lot of people tend to do that. And alignment between your words and your actions, because if you say a lot of things but you don't follow it up, if you are a person who constantly is berating your team, and then you go up in a company offsite and then say, hey, respect is very important, but you don't actually respect your people, there's no
Mm.
alignment between your words and your actions. So thoughts, words, actions have to be aligned for you to be a good storyteller. Then what is C and D, right? So C to me is clarity and the comprehensive data and facts, right? So often what may happen is that you feel that I'm authentic and I have complete, I believe this completely, but you probably don't have the data and facts to back it up. So the example that I keep thinking of is sometimes in non-profits, what happens is people are so passionate and they believe that, yes, we must do this, and we must, this is the biggest problem that needs to be solved. Have you looked at the data? Is it really the biggest problem that needs to be solved? And especially our biases come into play, emotions come into play. Unemotionally, can you actually look at the data with other people? Does the data support your authentic belief? So just try and look at that. So that's the second part of it. Now, the third part, which kind of comes in a way as a counterbalance to authenticity, right? Because a lot of people use authenticity to say free pass. I can say what I feel. If I don't like somebody, I can just, berate them in front of everybody. I'm being authentic, right? You telling me be authentic. Now, what is your problem if I, authentically berate everybody in my, I don't honestly feel that, I'm saying that's why I'm doing it. So the third E to me is empathy, right? So if you have to be empathetic to your audience and look at whatever you're saying, um, how will they think and how will they feel when you're saying what you're saying, right? So have that balance between authenticity and empathy. And empathy means two three things, right? One is that if I'm explaining something complicated, then immediately the empathy part in my mind should realize, oh, are you getting it or not? If I am using Hindi in a podcast, immediately, oh, there might be audiences who don't understand Hindi, so let me quickly translate. If I'm using jargon that only my team or my company understands, oh no, my audience may not understand this jargon, let me stop. So that empathy meter, tuck tuck tuck, should be keep ringing when it perceives that this guy may not understand it, right? Or you're looking for facial cues and body language cues that this is not going through. So that's on the understanding, and empathy also on the, so what is the audience thinking and what are they feeling, right? And that's a trickier one. I did People struggle with this more often than not. That I may say something very bluntly, but is that the best thing to do? Is that the best way to say it? Can I be more empathetic in saying something which needs to be said, but in a nicer way, so that it doesn't crush or defeat that person? So that's a good model for people to keep in mind, the ACE model: authenticity, the clear comprehensive truth, and the empathy.
So, so we talked about authenticity, and so imagine, uh, there has been a crisis in the company. Sales are down. I have a sales meeting, and I'm the sales head, right? Now, there are two ways to manage this. One is to actually go back and talk about budget versus achievement versus ability to uh, you know uh, get action, which is much better than what we did last month. So therefore, if I were a sales head, how would I use a story?
Yeah.
And there is a real negative situation where I'm down by 40%. So you just can't stay away from that fact, right? So that's one thing that I wanted. Uh, how would you go about doing it?
Sorry. Yeah. So no, this is also one of those tough situations, right? Not an easy situation. And I actually believe sometimes bad news delivery is an opportunity for a good storyteller to build his or her reputation or brand. Why? Because often, the majority of the times when you have bad news to deliver, people try and sugarcoat it. Hide is the worst thing, or sugarcoat is saying that, hey, it's not bad. Actually, that division did not do too badly. Overall, I know we didn't achieve, but this division did a good thing, and in this month we were still okay, and so on, right? So it's the audience is hearing all of this and saying, "Are you hiding something?" So then every time you share something, the audience is like, can I really trust this person? Even if there is actually genuinely good news, they'll be like, "No, I'm not so sure," right? So trust is the bedrock of any relationship. So as a communicator, you have to constantly keep that in mind. And so my the suggestion for people when they have to give bad news is two parts, right? One is lay it out. So I call it the what, why, what next framework. What happened? Don't beat around the bush, directly say. And I would kind of, the wording could be something like this: that, hey guys, okay, let me be upfront here, we don't have great news to share this quarter, so I'm going to be upfront. So we have not met our targets, we have fallen short by 20%, or we are not going to be able to meet our incentives this. But I'm going to tell you our analysis of why that has happened, and what are we going to do to make amends, to make things better again. So you have to immediately follow up the what with the why, and that why has to be as deep as possible. Go to the root cause of it. So you have to do that hard work before you start this communication, and then have an action plan to get out of that mess, right? And of course, even if you are completely not having it, and you want audience, then you can say, we've got some ideas, but we'd love for you to come and help us to build this action plan. So the what, why, what next will tell people that at least you're being upfront, and I can trust you, and if things are bad, you're not going to hide it from me. And I can also, I sense that you're in some form of control to try and do it, and hopefully things will become better from there. Then it's not just about being logical and analytical and doing this. You can also think of stories to inspire, and especially towards the end, right, when people are um, a little disillusioned, or thinking that, can we really do this, and this is not um, this seems too tall an order, and this has been such a bad quarter, how will we turn things around? Think of examples and stories, ideally from your own firm, from the past. And I'm sure if you dig, especially if it's a reasonably tenured firm, you will find enough examples from the past, right? That this happened, a very difficult situation came in the past, and it seemed all down and out, but this is what we did, and this is how we raised, right? So an inspiring story from your own firm from the past. Ideally, if you're telling that story, don't reveal the ending, right? You can make it like a mystery. By the way, I want to tell you something that in 19, I don't know, maybe not as far back as that, in 2017, there was a team which was struggling, and then they had this, and their metrics had fallen, and then they decided to do something, and by 2019 it all came back. By the way, what that which was that team? It was this team. So towards the end, when you kind of bring it out as a surprising thing, then that element of surprise and that inspiration all kind of hit you together. So if you have your own firm, I think that's a great way to end this sort of a conversation. I know of a guy who was brilliant at motivating frontline salespeople, because there it becomes very emotion driven, and he would happily take examples from movies. And then he will say that, uh, दीवार मूवी में एक रहीम चाचा थे और एक विजय था. And there was a Rahim Chacha character and a Vijay. And Rahim Chacha would happily go and pay the this, but Vijay was the one who said that I will not pay the 2 rupee whatever fine, and I will fight. So I need Vijays in my team. I don't need Rahim Chachas in my team. And he will use these analogies from movies and all. And Vishal Amrawat from BA, brilliant storyteller, but that works with that audience, right? So as I mentioned, a lot of these are context and this dependent. But in a senior corporate audience, I would definitely suggest what, why, what next, so that people have that assurance. And if there is possible, then use an inspiring story from your own team, from a similar team. That's a good way for people to end it.
So walk me through the framework. You talked about the 139 framework, right? So I think it's a right time for us to talk about it, and especially if I'm somebody in a company, if I want to start the the deliberate practice of learning to storytell. So what is this 139 framework, and walk us through it?
Sure, happy to. So let me kind of take a step back on that. You might have heard me use a framework quite a bit now. I'm a bit of a nerd for frameworks, and there's a reason for it. I feel that a framework is a handy tool for solving a problem in a tried and tested way. It's no framework is perfect. That there's a famous saying, right? All models are wrong, but some are useful. So all frameworks are imperfect or wrong, but some are useful. So you have to kind of take it with that. And so I have on some of mine, I can share this with you, a framework of frameworks, because at the end of the day, 139 is one small framework that sits within a larger frame. So that's one way to
No,
kind
in
of
fact,
broadly look at it.
I agree with you on that, Ravi. I think the way I see frameworks is it allows you to actually. It's almost like a small pigeonhole of concept that you can keep it there, and you can pull it out, and you can actually, and therefore you got lots of pigeonholes, and you basically each is a framework, but you need to pull it out as and when that is needed, and that's really how I see frameworks.
Well said. Yeah, and that skill comes with which framework to use in which situation is a skill which comes with practice, and that's why it's the art part of storytelling. So, um, so 139 for me is a way to build your story narrative, right? So let me tell you where that build the story narrative comes within a story, and I think it might be useful to talk about the ABCD process, or again framework, for want of a better word. Because that's where it's easy. So any storyteller broadly is going through these 4 steps, right? A is align with your audience. Who are you going to present to? What is their seniority? What is their background? What do they already know about the topic? What are their objectives from that session? What are their fears and worries and concerns? So as much as possible, if you can research your audience and know about their background, becomes easier for you to tailor and customize your story, right? So aligning with them, aligning with the I call them aligning with the audience, the data, the metrics, everything. The B is building the story narrative, right? So once you know your audience, don't start on a PowerPoint slide directly, right? So the PowerPoint will come later. On paper or Word document, write down your story in sentences. And sentences as in messages, not in terms of saying, I will talk to them about the project need, then I will talk about the key findings, and then the implications and the next steps. That is not a story. That is a list of agenda items, right? So instead, if I were to kind of take an example of a review, right, a quarterly review. So an agenda for a review would be revenue review, a cost, profitability, next steps. Tells me nothing, right? Instead, our revenue grew by 12% higher than target, mainly driven by South region and the new pricing strategy. That is one whole big sentence. On the cost side, we managed to rein in employee cost um, and materials, thereby pushing up EBITDA by 30 bps. Final, the next steps. We therefore need to continue this momentum but address some concerns in division A, right? So now these three are my broad three messages that I want to give in that year. And those three will then get a one line summary, which is that, revenue broadly doing good, EBITDA improving, but concern on division A. And then within revenue, that one line, it will further get divided. That, overall revenue grew by too much. And in South, what really drove the growth? In pricing strategy, what really happened? Then cost, again, you go into, employee, what happened in material, what happened, and so on. And then similarly on the this, and then each of those can then further, as you can imagine, drill down further, right? So you're building out the story like this. It will, if you know your data, it will not take you more than half an hour to do this, but that half an hour will give you so much clarity, and then your presentation preparation becomes easier, far easier. So this building the story narrative is a crucial, I would say 70% of your success rests on how well you do this. It should be so good that even if you don't have your slides, you're standing in an elevator with your audience, you should be able to tell that story, right? So majority of my coaching and training time also goes into the story narrative piece. And So in the narrative, the 139 framework comes, and I kind of give you a rough example of that, right? So you kind of have 3 lines and then a 1 line summary, and then further there are other elements to narrative also, like adding elements of surprise, adding personal stories, adding analogies, and so on. So that to me is more making it interesting, not just clear. So the 139 is a tool for clarity. These are tools for engagement. So that's broadly on the build a story narrative, the B part. C is choosing the right visuals and the slide, because we are visual creatures, we understand visuals better. And D is for delivering with impact. So there are some techniques around that also. So broadly, can remember ABCD. Audience, build a story narrative, choose the right charts and visuals, and deliver with impact, and spend the most time on the narrative piece.
Very nice, very nice. So it almost when you were explaining it and talking to me about the key messages, often when I see PowerPoint presentations, you start with the agenda. Okay, imagine that you were to completely unbox and actually say, what is the story one that I'm going to talk about, what is the story two I'm going to talk about, and then it becomes the agenda for the presentation. So it almost is, you are almost saying that don't start with agenda, start with the story and then go to the agenda, because agenda stories give you an agenda cannot give you a story.
So yeah, I
you
mean, almost is what I would agree. So I sometimes I say it's okay to have an agenda slide in addition to the story slide. I call it the exec summary slide, which is in one slide you're summarizing all the messages, all the findings, the recommendation, everything from that for that presentation, right? And in doing so, the framework that works best is 139, and I'm happy to share a
know,
post on that in the show notes.
Yeah, and more importantly, I think the way I am seeing it is, of course, you will have the agenda, but as you're building it, you are actually thinking about the story rather than in this agenda, what story am I going to say? I
Very
think
much.
that's the most important,
Yeah.
takeaway that I have for that. Okay, so that's a very nice way of actually building. So imagine if I were, doing a product design. Okay, and I have to tell the design story. Okay, would you think a similar concept works, or is there any other small tweaks that one need to do? Because in software it's largely code, it's largely tech, it's very very left brain thinking. So therefore, if I were to actually look at presenting a cloud architecture, okay, how do I tell a story there? Because you're really talking about concurrent users, you're talking about bits per second. So how do you tell a story there?
So everywhere, the principles apply everywhere, right? So 139 is like an empty vessel, so you can fit any type of story there. It could be anything.
Mm.
That's one advantage there. But sometimes people then get confused. So what do I put in the first bucket? What do I? Is that like a guideline for telling me that this is how you can? These are an indicative set of questions that you can use to do that. And in situations like these, right, so there are broadly two, I mean, there are multiple types of presentations, but one way to divide them is the two types for me are, um, one is like a review, data review presentation, right, which
Mm.
is, okay, last quarter, how much have we done? Whether it is numbers, whether it is metrics, whether it is financials, etc., right? So that is one. The second is kind of the example that you're talking about, right, that I'm built something new, a new product, a new feature, etc., and I want to talk about it, right? It's not just about the numbers will be there within that, but it's not just about that. So, or I want to pitch about my company, my team, my product. So in all of those, um the 139 is like an empty vessel, right? So what might be a good way to fill that vessel? So one framework, story framework that comes handy there is a very old one again, called the hero's journey. This was came out with this guy called Joseph Campbell, right? And he was a literature prof in the US. He did a very interesting exercise where he studied mythologies of all cultures. So he
Mm.
studied Hindu mythology, he studied Greek and Norse and all of those. And one fascinating finding that he came out with was that irrespective of, these different mythologies across thousands of miles have spread out, the underlying story structure is the same across all of these, and he called that
Mm.
story structure the hero's journey. And it's a very famous visual, if you search hero's journey, you'll immediately get it on online on Wikipedia and all. And it's very inspirational. Apparently, George Lucas, right, he was inspired by it, and he's used that for the Star Wars movies and many others, right? So it's great, but it's a little tricky from a business user's point of view, because it's a little esoteric in its language and stuff. So what I have done is to use that and make it into a simpler framework for business audiences, and it is useful in all these situations: product, cloud architecture, and all of that, which is very simply, I call it the 7 C's model, because there are 7 C's that come, the letter C. But very simply, the model is nothing, Swami, but saying ki there is a problem faced by a certain audience, and here is a solution for that problem.
Mm.
It's a
Mm.
problem solution framework, nothing else, right? And it
Mm.
gets more complicated than that, but that's what every movie also does, right? What does every That's why the hero's journey works, because in every movie the hero is shown as facing a big problem. In Bahubali, the younger son has to revenge his father's death and become the king. In Dangal, that girl has to defeat the Australian opponent NA. In Chak De India, the hockey team has to win. So every time the hero has been given a specific goal or a problem, and how they tackle all odds and win is the story of that movie, right? And so it coming back to this. So often, what mistake people do when they make these presentations about a product or a feature or a cloud architecture is they only talk about the solution. Hey, we did this, this has got this brilliant feature, and if you press this button, this happens. Why are we talking about this? Sorry, who is the audience? What was the problem that they were facing? How is this impacting them? So you have to step back and tell the story, not from your product point of view. Sorry, you're not the hero. Your audience is the hero. You have to
Mm.
change your mindset completely when you're telling that story. So you have to tell, for the cloud architecture, who is going to be using that architecture. Oh, acha, these kind of companies or this kind of user, right? Tell the story from their point of view. How was their life before you even came out, before that product even came out? And so the first C in that 7 C's model is the context, right? What was their life's context? They were going about, they had on-prem, all this servers that were there, and things were going fine. And then the next is a change. There is some change or disruption that comes into their life. Now change and disruption can be sudden, like demonetization, right? That was a sudden disruptive change. On one fell swoop, suddenly you couldn't use cash, and then that led to all this adoption of digital technology. Even in maybe in a software, a server case, that could be a sudden thing that one day servers crashed, right? And they were like, oh my god, we can never have this. We can't rely on our own servers. We have to have backup and all. That is one. Or it could be a trend, and most changes are like a gradual change and trend, right? 2005 6, who would think about cloud software, right? But
Mm.
over a period of 10, 15, 20 years, with so many things happening, it's becoming more robust, it is becoming cheaper, it is becoming more faster, anywhere access, all these trends are happening, right? And so eventually, again, I'm going back to the user of the cloud architecture, not the builder. My context was I was happy with on-prem, but then life is changing. Then it comes to the third C, which is a conflict, which is a key goal or a problem. My problem as a user is I want to continue to serve my software users with high reliability and all of that, with a low cost and fast and whatever, right? So how can I continue to do that whilst remaining on prem? Probably not. So which is where the conclusion, the next part comes in, the part A of the conclusion, that I need to think of a move to cloud, or I need to make this, if I'm already on the cloud, I need to make this big change in my architecture to the cloud. um, or I need to start using this ERP software product, or whatever, right? Whichever is a big leap. So this part of the story, and in most of these movie stories, they will show the hero grappling with this question that, can I do this? Can I do this? This is with me. There is, in the hero journey, they call it as a threshold, that you almost always have like a guru or a guide who will, be like Yoda is a quintessential guide in Star Wars, who will, cajole, encourage, push the hero to do what should be the right thing. And so you're kind of almost acting like that for the audience, and saying, hey, you must move to this. Once you do that, once you take the call that no, I must move to cloud, or I must take on this ERP software, the next two C's are the challenges and counters,
Mm.
which is I will have a lot of doubts. Hey, will it work? Hey, what about reliability? What if things go south? What if there is a ransomware attack or whatever, right? So you have to list down, by being empathetic again, what all are possible issues that my audience, again, that the hero will face in this journey of migration from on-prem to cloud. And I list down all the, there could be, like, in theory, limitless objections, but prioritize and then say, okay, these are the top 5, top 7, top 10 objections. For each objection, for each challenge that they are throwing at you, you have to have a counter. Hey, you worry about ransomware? Don't worry. This is the way the systems have been built, that nothing will happen. You worry about reliability? You worry about cost? Don't worry, you can try it and whatever, right? So for everything, you need to have like a counter. And hopefully your counters are strong enough and you're able to convince. And if you're able to convince, then the last two C's are, you give them a happy ending, happy conclusion, where you give them show them the benefit of the move, not just the features. And the final C in my model is a call to action, where you say, okay, guys, you should do it now, so that you don't miss out on this upgrade period, or whatever. So that's a 7 C's model, and again, happy to share that with you. And yeah,
Brilliant.
that allows you to kind of put it in that 139 framework, right? So maybe in the first box, I will put the context and the change, and then I'll talk about the conflict, and then the challenges, counters, and the conclusion. So something like that.
So one question that I have is, we are not taught to be contemplative, especially if you are a data scientist, or in this age of data where you need to do storytelling, right? You're not taught to be contemplative. The second thing is, uh, you know, uh, frankly, very few people understand aesthetics, right? So when you are talking about storytelling, there's a sense of color, there's a sense of feeling, there's a sense of emotion, and you're not taught that so easily, right? So therefore, how important is that? And if I were an engineer developing a mobile app, okay, I think there'll be a user's journey that will be there, there's a story there. But most importantly, what I also realize is, when you're doing the UI UX design, this what's the story that the hero will take away. And therefore, this thing around contemplativeness, the thing around aesthetics, as much as the hard facts, how do you really marry them? And I think it requires a certain sense of practice that you need to start building. Don't you think so? Is that not very important?
It is definitely, Swami. And aesthetics, I may have a slightly differing point of view. I'll come to that, but contemplation, incredibly important, right? And I keep telling people that, um, don't be working on the analysis and the data till all the time, right? You can do, to no end, you can keep analyzing, but ever so often step back and think, and actually physically take yourself out of the situation, if possible without your smartphone, right? Go on a walk, go on a cycle ride, take showers, whatever works for you. And sometimes I actually, when I before I go, I've done this, on cycle rides. Well, I'll give my mind a problem that, I'm getting stuck on this piece I'm writing, I don't know what to do, and that's it. And then I'm thinking, and then nothing comes, and suddenly, while I take a turn, something will strike, right?
Mm.
So you'll surprise yourself. So I highly recommend any reflection practice that works for you. People talk about meditation. I'm not gone there yet. I wish. I think, and although they say in meditation you should not be thinking anything. So, but yeah, I think any contemplation practice, whether it is through a combination of exercise or whatever, you should do. um, Aesthetic is interesting, right? That um, can get a little tricky if some people say, but I don't have an aesthetic sense. And my response to them is that, yeah, fair enough. Like, even I'm not like a uh, visually gifted person, right? So I would not, if you look at the clothes that I wear or whatever, people will be like, you're very dull and boring, and that's fine. But what you should use visuals for, definitely, whether or not you're aesthetically gifted, is for clarity. And I think there's a lot is easy to learn. It's almost like a science. So what does that mean? That means that when you're showcasing something, whether it is on a slide, whether it is, even on an email, if you are putting too much information at one go, you are putting a lot of cognitive load on the audience, right? And
Mm.
a lot of the time, design is, of course, about, what color will go with what else, but more importantly, it's about simplicity. There is this famous line that I can't, remember now, but it's the hallmark of a good design is when there's anything more to be added, but when there's nothing left to be removed
Mm.
from there, right? So you have to keep removing stuff that does not add value. Remove clutter. And it might go down to, as a basic thing, as saying, on charts, if you've got a column chart, right? Think of a column chart, and you've got numbers on top of those column charts, right? You got a revenue growth or whatever. Now, often that chart will also have the grid lines at the back, and it will have a scale with numbers. Now, the grid lines and the scale don't add any value in that chart, because I'm seeing the numbers directly. I don't need remove that. You may have an unnecessary placement of, border. You can remove that. So remove any item that doesn't add any value. That's step one. That's like a easy low hanging fruit. More importantly, the second step most people don't do, which is use the principle of visual hierarchy.
Mm.
And this is a design principle, and there's a very easy to learn design principle. You don't have to become a aesthetic artist or whatever, right? Visual hierarchy is just this. In your um, any document, it may be a poster, it may be an email, it may be a slide, of course. Identify that what is your core message. Of course, your slide should have a clear message on the top. And then, to demonstrate that message, what are the 3 to 5 elements that need to be highlighted on that slide?
Mm.
Ideally not more than that. Highlight those in your company's brand color, right? Don't worry about saying what color format. No, your company has a brand color, take that brand color and highlight that. Everything else, here is the easiest solution for you. Don't scratch your brain. Use the color gray, right? So if you've got a chart, for example, that shows your company's growth by region across time, and say, let's say you've got 4 regions and you've got 3 years, so 4 into 3, 12, you'll have 12 bars, and that'll be it'll be quite crowded. um, let me make it a little more complicated, right? So instead of 4, you've got 7 regions, so 7 into 3, 21 bars. So suddenly you've got 21 data points. That's quite a bit. But your message on the top says that we have seen strong growth overall, driven by region A and B, semicolon. However, F is a concern. So now you've got 3 things to highlight: A, B, and F. What do you do with the rest? You keep them on the slide, but you use shades of the color gray to push them to the back. And this will mean a little extra work, because Excel will automatically give multiple colors to everything, right? A little extra work in that formatting of the slide, but it will save the audience's time in making it much faster for them to, because their eyes will directly go to the A, B, and F. And so what they saw on the top, they can, with a, in a fraction of a second, they can quickly see that, got it, okay, A is going up, B is going up, F is coming down. Okay, why is it happening? Maybe the next slide will talk about it. So that's visual hierarchy, right? So you can, why is it called hierarchy? Because some things are like visually, it's almost like a 3D thing. One is ahead and the other is in the background. And anybody can do that, right? And you will see examples of that all around you. Just start looking at apps that you use.
Mm.
You will find that more often than not, unnecessary things are pushed to the back with the color gray. Websites, everywhere people add advertisements, so people use this. It's not and it's definitely not rocket science, and that's something that even if you are not quote unquote a design person or a aesthetically gifted person, it's something that you can do.
Very nice. So one of the things that I almost say, if you are a good storyteller, is you know what you are not talking, uh, which is in the slide, okay, is also a very important thing, because most often what happens is that you just repeat what is there in the slide. So therefore, if you want to build good storytelling skills, try not to repeat what is there in the slide, but it is important what is it that you're going to be conveying in that by that slide. Is that a very important factor?
Very much, very much. Yeah. So, so a couple of things that come to mind here, Swami. That one is that you ideally, in an ideal, I know this is not, we are not in an ideal. In an ideal world, you should have two presentations or two versions of your presentation, right? So one version is the to be read version, because
Mm.
eventually you'll have to send something to somebody either before as a pre-read or a post-read. That is where the text is there, right? So you create that first, because let's face it, that has to be done no matter what. Ideally, before you are going to present it, now I don't recommend to do this for every presentation. If you're doing one presentation a week, you will not have the time to do this, I agree. If you're doing one presentation to the CEO in a quarter or some senior person, right? Those are high stakes communication events. Do not apply. The problem is we're like, I've done this work here. I know. It's fine. I know I'll manage. I'll answer any question. You're not going for a Q&A session. You're going for a presentation, and you have a chance to impress and make it easier, right? So reduce the text on the slide as much as possible, so that the audience is not looking at the slide reading whilst they should be listening to you. So what do you do then? So you have to go beyond what is written by, I call it a script. You have to have a script for what will you say on every slide,
Mm.
and that you have to prepare beforehand. Um, Ideally, practice it. So practice means not like by heart it, but just say it aloud in front of another audience. Ditch the mirror method, because your face is not going to give you a feedback, but any other audience will give you some feedback, and just hearing yourself say something aloud will, oh my god, this is not flowing, oh that doesn't make sense, and so on, right? So just doing that once also is a great way to get confidence and actually even make tweaks to that script. So yeah, I think going beyond the text by first having lesser text in the presentation version of your of your slides, and having a script for your presentation, it's very useful.
Brilliant. So I want to, ask you one last question. You are also a storytelling coach, right? So when people come to you, how does one, what do you do to, equip people with this storytelling skill? So can you talk to me about, how long do we need to do it? What are the processes that you follow? How do you go about it?
No, absolutely. Thanks, Swami. So sorry. I think the first step is to understand the importance of this as a skill, and I'm hoping that people who come have that clarity that this is important for me to succeed, to do well in life. Then the broad approach that I take is that, unlike in a training workshop in which I will try and cover a fair number of concepts in a day, because I've got that audience for a day or a two or whatever. In a coaching relationship, it's a longer term thing, right? You don't have to. So in a coaching relationship, we might start with, of course, understanding the person. Who do they present to? Who are their core audiences? Um, uh, what are their key expectations? That audience's key expectations. Um, do they think is going well with their storytelling currently? What do they think is not going so well with their storytelling currently? And getting those inputs from as a self, and as getting those inputs from that audience will kind of be like a good diagnostic to know that I think this person is fairly good on the visual front, but maybe they struggle a little bit on the narrative, or they're very good in the structured narrative part, but they struggle on the engagement elements, or they're very good in engagement elements, but the delivery part is a problem, right? So that is, I think, important for me as a coach to know that where is it most I think the intervention needs to be done the most. And then irrespective of where the intervention needs to be focused on, I will definitely give people an overview of the storytelling techniques, like this ABCD framework, that these are the broad elements that are there, and so that they know it's like a map, right? And then we can tell you, okay, now we are going into this region, now we're going to this region. Then we will have multiple sessions, right? And in each session, ideally I try and connect that session with a real life event. So it doesn't make too much sense to learn something just for the sake sometime in the future I will use it, right? It should be like, oh, next week I've got a town hall presentation, can we work on that? That makes it very tangible. So then, okay, so you've got a town hall presentation next week. Okay, so okay, let's talk about the audience. This is the audience. Okay, what are their objectives? Okay, this objective. Okay, what is it that you want to tell? And so we actually go about preparing. So it's like work for them with a coach, right? So it's just more better use of that time. Go about preparing their talk. Again, we'll go through the A, then build a narrative for the talk using the 139, add the engagement elements. We go through the same process. Okay, let's talk about the slides. How will we do the visuals? Okay, what do you think should be the right thing? Hey, how have you thought about this? Hey, how about this? Doesn't it make sense? So as they're going about it, they realize, oh, this is what I would have normally done, but now I'm doing it in a different way, and I'm hopefully learning something in doing that better.
So
And
how
then
long does
maybe
this
round two
coach?
and round three.
So sorry, how long does this coaching go? Is it a couple of months, so many weeks?
Yeah,
How does it? Yeah.
I think a few months, because I think time and life comes in the way sometimes, right? Ideally once a week would be great, but you probably don't even have that many high stakes events. And so if you're doing at least like one catch up every fortnight or maybe every 3 weeks, that's kind of good enough. And it's more like, do it when you feel the need. So it's not like, you have to complete these 4 sessions, otherwise it will not be. I think it's more about your, time availability and the requirement, and then it can be built. So it's quite flexible that way.
Okay, great. So I'm pretty much coming to the end of our conversation, where there are a bit of rapid fire questions that I have from my end, Ravi. So my first question to you is, what does success mean to you?
So so the one way I think of this is this ikigai framework, right? So of
Mm,
course I'm keeping personal or family part aside. That's of course super crucial. That's if you're not, if that's the most important thing. But from a profession, I'm talking about professional success, right? So professional success for me is for you to meet your ikigai, which is it's a Japanese concept, which means that you're at the confluence of your ability, what you're really good at doing, your passion, or what drives you, the commercials, which is are people willing to pay for it, and social impact, that it has got some social impact, or it's a skill that the world needs. And so that is one that broadly, are you in the space of where you're meeting your ikigai. Now for me, there's an interesting analogy that I thought of when I was, I thought by 2016 I had kind of gone into this, and I thought, now I found my ikigai. But I realize it's ikigai is not like one place. It is also like a vast area.
mm,
Within that also, you're exploring and finding and optimizing. And the analogy that I think of is that in India, you're roaming around saying, okay, do I want to be in Konkan beaches? Oh, nice, but no, this is not my thing. In the plains of the Deccan, no, not this. In the valleys of the Chambal, no. In the forest, no. Himalayas. Oh, this is it. I found my ikigai. Right? So now you've reached the Himalayas and you think you found your ikigai. Then you realize, oh my god, the Himalayas are stretching from whatever Kashmir to Assam. So now within that also I'm optimizing, and so there I've got, pardon me, one more framework. And this framework came, I mean, the name was given to me by a friend called Uday Kiran, where we're talking about what do you, so we called it the 4F framework, right? So let me see if I remember. So financials plus fulfillment plus fun divided by effort.
Mm.
So of course financially it has to make sense. Anything that you do, fulfillment is, you're satisfied mentally that, hey, this has actually meant something, this has moved the needle for this person or for this organization, and now they are happier. And you get a lot of it, when clients come back to you and say, hey, this has really helped me and stuff. Fun is just, the person that you're with, and you're just having fun doing that workshop, and with the people that you're with. So I think all those three, to me, if that is in balance. And effort, of course, you want to work hard, but you don't want to be just doing donkey work for the sake of it. So you want to try and minimize that part of it. So I kind of try and optimize for that.
Very nice. Uh, uh, if you were to give a piece of advice to a 18-year-old in an university today, what would that be?
Oh, I struggle with this kind of thing. I don't want to be like Gyan Baba, but I would say, again, that the curiosity part comes into play, right? Be curious, um, experiment, and be aware of yourself, right? So I wish I had gone on this Ikigai journey a little earlier. And I think, yeah, by the time I was 24, 25 is when it kind of struck me that, I need to be more deliberate about my choices. I think that's when I started taking choices on my own. I think today's kids do much, much earlier. Um, Sometimes I feel they may worry too much about saying, hey, this is not perfect. I'm not in the perfect zone on my, so don't have too high standards also for satisfaction, for passion, etc. I don't think anybody, even if somebody is working in their most passionate job, are happy 100% of the time. Like, even for me, there are dull days, there are difficult days, there are days that I realize, oh my god, I have to go through this call again. It has to be there, right? You cannot have 100% happiness all the time. That's a myth. You speak to the topmost athletes, the topmost performers, everybody does their reps, does their, the boring part of the job, that is always there. But at a broad level, that feeling of, fulfillment and satisfaction is definitely there. So that is what you should aim for. And keep thinking of your life as, as a series of hypotheses, right? That's what I've been doing. That, my hypothesis is that if I do this, I will move closer to my ikigai.
Mm.
And I tried that hypothesis. Oh no, it worked on this module, but it did not work on this module. So let me try another hypothesis, or let me tweak this hypothesis a little bit. So it's like an experimenter if you're kind of doing that. As 18, I think there's so much time available to you to experiment, and by the time you'll get your ikigai very fast. Hopefully,
Brilliant.
inshallah.
Uh, so tell me, uh, what's one piece of best advice you ever got over these years, which you remember and you pretty much value? You may have got a lot, but probably one that you can pick up.
So I think Abhishek's advice is one that definitely comes to mind as one that, a few more that are coming is one, was by Gopal from my consulting days, Gopal Sarma, who's now with Bain. And during that time, our obsession was detail and more data, right? That, we would always tell him, hey, we can't tell the client anything. We don't have enough data. We don't have enough data. So he would kind of always push back and say, you can never have enough data, right? You have to have hypothesis, you have to have a point of view, and of course back it up with data, and do whatever you can. And so there's always, in any advice, too much of extreme is bad. And I always also realize that a strong hypothesis can lead you to confirmation bias, and you can go down the path of not backing up with enough data. But a lot of people, I find, go too deep into data hunting and not having enough of a point of view. So I think that is also a useful advice that has served me well.
Brilliant. So, what's one thing that what you believe in, others don't agree with you on?
So yeah, so I've been trying to convince people of this, and I'm not doing a good job, clearly enough of a good job. I think business reviews are broken. This concept of the quarterly or monthly business review, the way it is done, I mean, I'm not saying that it is, the review needs to happen. The way it is done is quite bad. And It's not that it's not been solved. There are companies which have solved it, but it's a tough solve. It's not an easy solve. The way it is happening currently is that, hey, everybody comes and then there's a plethora of data that they present on slide after slide after slide. The reviewers, who are usually senior audiences, as a joke, I almost say they're almost like masochistic, right? That, bring it on, give me more data, I will take it on. I've got the mental ability to sustain this for a whole day. How are you joking, man? Like, who are you, fooling? It's difficult, right? So, push the onus of crafting a narrative on your leaders, right? So don't make it a data review, make it a narrative review. So it's not, this is not rocket science, this is not a new idea. Amazon has solved it a decade back. So they call it the 6-page narrative, right? And it's not easy. I'm not saying it's an easy one. There are variants. You don't have to go to that level of, make a 6-page Word document narrative. And so let me kind of talk about what Amazon has done, and then, we can talk about the challenges of it. So in Amazon, any product review, any new idea, business review, it starts with the person who's, let's say, talking about the product or the business idea to present, no, I mean, I say present, sorry, to give a 6-page Word document printed out to all the people. The first 5 minutes of that review, of half an hour review, is spent in silent reading. It's remarkable. So I've, people write about there's a book about this where people write about saying that, you can just hear the pages being turned and that's it. And so they're all reading and absorbing. And what that does is that, first of all, to write a report is immense amount of clarity in thinking that is there. So your own thinking becomes better, and, you're leaving out the fluff and all of that. um, Two, as a reader, I may have a question that immediately comes on page number 2, but it gets answered on page number 4. So I don't waste everybody's time by asking unnecessary questions, right? And everybody then is on the same page. Then the rest of the discussion is at a much higher level, right? So instead of asking, hey, what does that number mean? Hey, but have you been reconciled that with the data from there? Hey, wait, is that in USD or in euro? All rubbish questions, right? Of course, most organizations have moved beyond that, but sometimes that also happens. Or a template which has got 10 columns into 10 rows, and 100 data points. You're going through all of this, you are asking questions. That guy obviously knows all the data and he's giving all the data, but it's a mess. Yeah, ask that person to craft the 139, an executive summary narrative. um, it is tough. It's not an easy skill. And you'll have to push in order to support. It's worth it. So it may mean 2-3 reviews which are uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable, because you're changing the way it is done. But I feel that the other side of that discomfort will be a vastly improved review, because reviews, if you think about it, Swami, they are very expensive for a company. You're
Hmm.
getting very senior people whose time is extremely valuable, all in the same room, and you could get magic out of those reviews if a good narrative is presented. You could have much better discussions, much better decisions. It could change the direction of that company. Yeah. And here you are discussing about decimal points and currency fluctuation. So I think so that to me is one thing that I believe strongly, which maybe other people also maybe believe, but they maybe, yeah, maybe through action on it.
Okay. Uh, so, if you were to invite 4 people for a dream dinner, who would that be and why?
This is such a remarkable question, and this is yeah, I so the first choice would be someone which is, you not think in the world of storytelling, but this Greek legend philosopher of Aristotle, right, called Aristotle. um, Even today we are kind of learning and talking about the stuff that he used to write about and talk about. And remarkable guy, right? So I'd love to pick his brain. And one of the most fundamental storytelling frameworks that I teach even now is one that he coined, which is the ethos pathos logos framework. That in order to convince somebody, you need a balance between logic, which is logos, emotion, which is pathos, and trust and credibility, which is ethos. So Aristotle will definitely be one. I'd love to have Barbara Minto, who's also a legend in that clarity of thinking. And even now it's being used by all of McKinsey, all of Bain, all of Accenture all these big firms are using some variant of the pyramid principle. um, I'd love to have Chip Heath, because he's one of the guys who's really influenced me the most in terms of, apart from Made to Stick, he came out with another book a couple of years back called Making Numbers. Shucks, I forget the full title, but Making Numbers or something, not relatable, Making Numbers Work, or Count, Making Numbers Count. How do you tell a story of big numbers in a better way? So I would say Chip. Who could be a fourth? Now, this is an interesting one. So maybe somebody who's from a fiction world, right? And fiction is an interesting one. The one of the storytellers that I admire the most in fiction is Chris Nolan. Who doesn't admire him? So yeah, that would be my, I would say.
Very nice.
I think I'm missing out on some visual guys, but maybe, yeah, I think since you said 4.
Very nice. Brilliant. Now that, this is my last question. Now that you've heard the podcast, you have seen, how we do this, I would call conversation. If you were to, think of a guest who you would recommend and who you would want to listen, who would that be? And it need not be somebody whom you know, but it's just saying that, okay, I'm a subscriber to this podcast. I just wish I listened to this person.
This has put me in a spot because there are many people who I'd love to listen to in terms of understanding their craft. Some of them are generally available on podcasts. So for example, Harsha Bhogle, right now, I would love to have him, someone like him, on a podcast where you just go deeper and deeper into his craft. How does he do what he does? Because he talks about stories about cricket and all of that, which is there. There's on a bunch of podcasts, but I don't think anybody has probed, or maybe I've not come across stories where he's been probed about his own journey. Another person that immediately comes to mind in terms of, again, his own process and craft is, have you heard of Amit Verma, The Seen and the Unseen?
Yeah.
Phenomenal the way he has built this series of, I've mentioned this on the group, that he is basically creating autobiographies for free, of biographies for free for some of the guests that he's bringing on board, right? And the depth that he goes to, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7-hour interviews, it's ridiculous. So I mean, yeah, I think I don't think he comes himself on other podcasts. I think I best of luck to the person who interviews Amit Verma, because I think I would be super nervous. But it'll be great to kind of again get to know his craft. And
Fantastic. Thanks, Ravi. Lovely, having this conversation. Honestly, as you spoke, it gave me vivid pictures. Your words, drew some pictures in my head. And that's really what I think a great storyteller is all about. And it's a fantastic conversation. Lots to learn. So many books that you mentioned. Lots to be put on show notes. And thanks a lot. Really enjoyed this conversation and the time I had with you.
Thank you so much, Swami. It was a great pleasure for me also. Thank you.